I never thought one ordinary drive could change everything. Looking back, it feels unreal, like the kind of story people whisper about but never admit living through. That day began with nothing more dramatic than a trip to see my father. Yet by nightfall, I was standing in a dim motel room with my stepson, my heart pounding for reasons I didn't dare explain. The morning had started uneventfully. I stood in front of the hallway mirror, tugging at my blouse, wondering when the sparkle in my eyes had dimmed. My husband, Logan, had been away for months on business. Calls with him were rushed, distracted, more obligation than connection. I missed his presence, but what I missed more was being noticed, truly seen. Staring at my reflection, I thought, I'm 47, but I'm not invisible. Not yet. Behind me, I heard dishes clattering. Gary, my stepson, was finishing breakfast. He was 22, all lanky confidence and restless energy, a young man on the edge of his own life. The smell of toast and coffee drifted through the air as I walked into the kitchen. "Ready for a little road trip?" I asked, leaning on the counter. Gary looked up with that mischievous grin of his. "Sure, but only if Dad buys me a better car before summer. This one's a disaster." I rolled my eyes. "We'll talk about that later. Just get your keys. You need the practice anyway." He laughed, grabbed his jacket, and a few minutes later we were pulling out of the driveway. The late morning sun shimmered on the asphalt, and the warm air hummed with the sound of cicadas. For the first hour the drive was easy. Gary hummed along to the radio, occasionally throwing out jokes that only he found funny. I scrolled through my phone, half listening, half lost in thought. His light-heartedness was almost irritating, but it was also a relief compared to the heaviness that had settled in my chest for weeks. Then it happened. A sudden hiss cut through the music. The car jerked, sputtered, and the engine died with a loud cough. Gary swore under his breath as he guided us to the side of the road. Dust swirled up from the tires as we rolled to a stop on the empty stretch of highway. My stomach tightened. What was that? "Not good," he muttered, climbing out of the car. He popped the hood and I followed, shielding my eyes from the sun. The smell of burnt oil hit me immediately. Gary poked around with no real plan, sighing in frustration. "I think it's done for," he said finally. "Some kind of leak. We're not getting anywhere today." Pulled out my phone. 1 bar of service, maybe 2 if I held it high. Calls to roadside assistance kept dropping. Minutes stretched into an hour, then 2. The heat pressed down on us like a weight, tempers fraying with every failed attempt. "This is ridiculous," I snapped. "We can't just sit here all night." Gary kicked at a pebble. "What do you want me to do? Build a new engine out of duct tape?" We argued until both of us fell silent, drained and sticky with sweat. Finally, he suggested, "There's a motel about 10 miles back. The tow company said they can't send anyone until morning anyway. We should just get a room and wait it out." The thought made me uneasy. Logan would lose his mind if he knew his wife had spent the night alone in a hotel with his son. But we had no choice. The sun was sinking lower, and the road stretched empty in both directions. By the time we reached the motel, the sky had turned orange and the heat gave way to a heavy dusk. The building looked worn, its neon sign buzzing faintly against the twilight. Paint peeled from the shutters, and the parking lot was nearly empty except for a few beat-up cars. At the reception desk, Gary leaned on the counter, flashing his easy smile at the clerk. I stood behind him, arms crossed, uneasy but resigned. "1 room," the clerk said flatly, sliding over a key. "We're full up. Storm last week knocked out half the power, so sorry about the inconvenience." My chest tightened. "1 room," I whispered to Gary. He shrugged, pocketing the key. "Better than sleeping in the car." We climbed the narrow staircase, the carpet faded and musty. At the end of the hall, Gary unlocked the door. The moment I stepped inside, disappointment hit me like a wave. The room was suffocatingly small. A single bed pressed against the wall, its quilt faded from years of use. The ceiling light flickered, casting shadows that made the space feel even more cramped. The air conditioner rattled weakly, pushing out little more than a wheeze of warm air. A single narrow window looked out over the cracked asphalt of the parking lot. "This is it," I murmured, my voice low with disbelief. Gary tossed his bag onto the bed and laughed. "What did you expect? The Ritz. Relax, it's just one night." His nonchalance irritated me, yet something about his grin, careless, unbothered, stirred an unfamiliar feeling I couldn't name. I set my bag down and rubbed the back of my neck. "This heat is unbearable," I muttered. "Take the shower first," he said, flopping onto the bed as though it were his personal throne. "This is your kingdom anyway. Make yourself at home." His joking tone lingered in the air, and I caught myself staring for a moment longer than I should have. Quickly I turned away, slipping into the bathroom. The mirror reflected a flushed face, damp hair clinging to my skin. I sighed, turning on the water until steam filled the small space. As the spray hit my shoulders, I closed my eyes, hoping the heat would wash away the tangle of emotions I didn't want to face. "He's Logan's son," I told myself. "You're tired, you're stressed. That's all this is." But even as I tried to convince myself, the image of Gary's grin lingered. By the time I stepped back into the room, dressed in a light summer dress, Gary was stretched out across the bed with his arms behind his head, eyes closed as if he hadn't a care in the world. The room was so small. His presence seemed to fill it entirely. I stood there, staring for a moment before forcing myself to speak. "I'm going down to the restaurant. Need to clear my head." He cracked one eye open. "Bring me back a burger." Rolling my eyes, I slipped out of the room, my heart heavier than I cared to admit. The restaurant was little more than a diner attached to the motel, but it was cooler than the room. I ordered a small meal and a glass of wine, pushing food around my plate while my mind replayed the day. The broken-down car, the endless road, the tiny room upstairs. When the wine was gone, I paid the bill and climbed the stairs back to our room. My hand lingered on the doorknob before I pushed it open. Inside, the air was quiet. Gary had showered, his damp hair falling over his forehead. He lay on the bed in a plain robe, half asleep, lips curved in a faint smile. The sight froze me in place. My pulse quickened, my thoughts scattered. I told myself it was nothing. Just exhaustion. Just circumstance. But deep down, I knew something had shifted the moment I walked through that door. And as I set my bag down, the thought that haunted me was simple, terrifying, and impossible to ignore. This night was only beginning. The motel room felt even smaller when I stepped back inside after dinner. The faint scent of soap lingered in the air, mixed with the musty smell of the thin carpet. Gary was sprawled across the bed, his robe loose, damp hair falling over his forehead. His eyes were half closed, a faint smile tugging at his lips as though he were dreaming. For a moment I froze in the doorway. Something about the scene unsettled me, not because it was wrong but because it was too natural, too comfortable. My pulse quickened, and I forced myself to breathe. "You didn't bring me that burger," Gary murmured without opening his eyes. I set my purse down. "You were asleep. And besides, they didn't have anything worth eating." He cracked one eye open and grinned. "Excuses. Guess I'll just starve." His casual tone made the room feel lighter, but the tension beneath it didn't fade. I busied myself by pulling the chair away from the corner and sitting down, trying to create distance. Yet in a space that small, distance was an illusion. The hum of the faulty air conditioner filled the silence. I crossed my legs, folding my arms, pretending to check my phone. Gary leaned back on the bed, hands tucked behind his head. "You're really tense," he said suddenly. I glanced up. "After the day we've had." "Of course I am." He smirked. "You act like the world's ending. It's just a broken car and a crummy room. Tomorrow it'll be fixed, and we'll laugh about this." I wanted to believe him, but his light-heartedness only made my chest feel heavier. "It's not that simple." "Sure it is." He sat up, resting his elbows on his knees. "You always overthink everything. That's why Dad says." He stopped abruptly, his words hanging in the air. I raised an eyebrow. That's why Dad says what? Gary looked down, rubbing the back of his neck. Forget it. Just, you worry too much. Something about his hesitation stuck with me. I wanted to push, but instead I stood, brushing invisible dust from my dress. I'm going to shower again before bed. This heat is unbearable. When I closed the bathroom door behind me, I let the water run and stared at my reflection in the fogged mirror. My face was flushed, my mind restless. I pressed my palms to the sink, whispering to myself, pull it together. He's Logan's son. You're exhausted. That's all this is. But no matter how I tried to reason, the truth gnawed at me. I had noticed Gary differently tonight, and that thought alone terrified me. When I emerged, hair damp, Gary had changed into shorts and a t-shirt. He was sitting cross-legged on the bed, scrolling through his phone. The robe had vanished, but the image of him in it lingered in my head. You take forever, he said without looking up. I climbed into the chair again. I wasn't racing against a clock. He chuckled, finally setting his phone aside. You can't seriously plan to sleep in that chair all night. It's fine. It's not. That thing looks like it was stolen from a dentist's office in the 70s. I shrugged, avoiding his gaze. Better than crowding you. Gary leaned back against the headboard, folding his arms. You're impossible. There's plenty of space. Just stay on your side. I promise I won't bite. The joke made me roll my eyes, but the idea of lying beside him unsettled me more than the chair's discomfort. Still, he was right. The chair was hard, the air thick, and fatigue pressed down on me. After a long pause, I finally muttered, "Fine. Just for tonight." He patted the other side of the bed with a grin. See? Problem solved. Sliding under the sheet, I kept my body rigid, pressed as close to the edge as possible. Gary shifted, giving me room, but the mattress dipped slightly beneath his weight, a reminder of how close we really were. The light clicked off, plunging the room into a dim haze. I shut my eyes, trying to steady my breathing, but sleep refused to come. The silence was heavy, broken only by the rattle of the air conditioner and Gary's soft movements. Minutes stretched, and then I sensed him watching me. My eyes flicked open just enough to confirm it. His head was turned, his gaze unmistakable even in the half-dark. Heat rushed to my cheeks. What? I whispered, trying to keep my voice calm. Nothing, he said, though his tone carried weight. Just, I can't believe this day happened. I turned on my side, facing away from him. Believe it. It happened, and tomorrow it'll be over. But instead of silence, I heard him shift closer. Not touching, not too near, but closer than before. You know, he said quietly, I've always thought you were stronger than Dad gives you credit for. The comment caught me off guard. What are you talking about? I mean it. You hold everything together, even when he's not around. I notice it more than you think. I swallowed, unsure how to respond. Praise from Gary was unexpected, and something in his voice felt raw, honest. You shouldn't say things like that, I whispered. Why not? It's true. His words hung in the air, heavier than any silence. I pulled the sheet higher over my chest, staring into the dark. Neither of us spoke for a long time. I tried to focus on the hum of the air conditioner, on the faint glow of the parking lot light bleeding through the curtains. But the room seemed to shrink, every breath louder, every second longer. Then, just as I began to drift, Gary spoke again, softer this time. You ever feel like people don't really see you? The question pierced me. I stayed quiet, hoping he'd let it go, but he didn't. I do, he continued. Sometimes I think Dad sees right through me. And then when you're around, I don't know. It feels different. My chest tightened. I wanted to dismiss it, to laugh it off, but the sincerity in his tone wouldn't allow it. Finally I whispered, Go to sleep, Gary. He sighed but didn't push further. The silence returned, thick and restless. I kept my eyes shut, but inside I was wide awake, every nerve on edge. Minutes later, I sensed him still awake, sitting up slightly. My curiosity betrayed me, and I opened my eyes. He was watching me again, his expression unreadable. The look in his eyes sent a shiver through me. Not playful, not teasing, but something deeper, more complicated. I turned away quickly, heart pounding. My thoughts tumbled in every direction, yet one truth lingered with terrifying clarity. If this night continued, we might cross a line we could never erase. The darkness in that motel room felt heavier than any night I'd ever known. The rattling hum of the weak air conditioner seemed louder than before, each breath filling the silence like a confession neither of us wanted to voice. I lay still, my body tense, listening for signs that Gary had finally fallen asleep. But I knew he hadn't. His breathing was too shallow, too uneven. He was waiting just like me. When I finally turned my head, our eyes met in the dim light leaking through the thin curtains. There was no teasing grin this time, no playful remark. His gaze was steady, searching, almost hesitant. "Why are you looking at me like that?" I whispered. Gary's voice was low, but it carried a weight I hadn't heard before. "Because I can't stop." The honesty in his tone struck deeper than I wanted to admit. I pushed myself upright, sitting on the edge of the bed with my back to him. My hands fidgeted with the sheet, twisting the thin fabric as though it could anchor me. "You shouldn't say things like that," I murmured. "It's not right." "I know." The mattress dipped as he shifted closer. "But just because something isn't right doesn't mean it isn't real." Those words sank into me like stones dropped in water, rippling through every hidden corner of my thoughts. I wanted to argue, to remind him of boundaries, but my voice caught in my throat. Because deep down I couldn't deny that same truth. I stood abruptly, pacing the narrow room. The space felt suffocating, the air thick with emotions I didn't know how to contain. My fingers brushed the edge of the dresser, the cheap veneer rough under my skin. "This isn't who I am," I said finally, though my voice lacked conviction. Gary leaned forward, elbows on his knees, watching me intently. "Maybe it's not who you were. But maybe it's who you are now. Things change." The words rattled me. I turned to face him, anger and fear mixing in my chest. "You're too young to understand the consequences of saying things like that." He didn't flinch. "Maybe. But I'm not too young to feel them." For a moment, neither of us moved. The silence between us wasn't empty. It was loaded like the air before a storm. My pulse hammered in my ears. I wanted to leave, to step outside and breathe, but there was nowhere to go. The motel room was a trap, holding us together when distance was the only thing that could save us. Finally, I sank back onto the bed, careful to stay on the edge. I drew my knees to my chest, staring at the floor. "You don't know what you're doing," I whispered. "I do," he said softly. "I've known for a while. I just never thought you'd feel it too." The room tilted around me. There it was, spoken aloud, the thing I'd been too afraid to admit. His words left no room for denial. And the terrifying part was, he was right. I closed my eyes, forcing steady breaths. "You need to sleep. Tomorrow the car will be fixed, and this will be behind us." But even as I said it, I knew it was a lie. Some things can't be erased, no matter how much you try to bury them. Gary shifted again, lying back with his arm draped over his forehead. His voice, though quiet, filled the room. "You think you can just forget tonight, but I can't. I won't." I lay back too, staring at the cracked ceiling, the dim flicker of the light bulb above us. I wanted to tell him to stop, to silence the words before they took root. But instead I stayed quiet, because part of me didn't want him to stop. The night dragged on, heavy and endless. At some point, exhaustion pulled me under, though my sleep was restless, filled with fractured dreams. When the pale light of morning finally slipped through the curtains, I woke with a start. Gary was already up, fully dressed, lacing his shoes by the door. The sight of him jolted me back into reality. "Where are you going?" asked, my voice still groggy. He looked up, expression unreadable. "The tow truck came early. Car's fixed. We should hit the road. I sat up slowly, rubbing my temples. The weight of the night before clung to me, heavy and unshakable. I wanted to ask him if he felt it too, if the storm inside me had touched him the same way. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I gathered my things in silence. The walk down the narrow hall felt longer than it should have. The reception clerk barely looked up as we returned the key. Outside, the morning sun was already hot, glaring off the asphalt. The car hummed as Gary started it, the broken engine now repaired. We drove in silence, the highway stretching out before us like nothing had happened. But everything had. I kept my eyes on the horizon, afraid to look at him. My mind replayed every glance, every word from the night before. The tension still lived between us, unspoken but undeniable. Finally, Gary broke the silence. "Are you going to pretend none of it mattered?" I turned toward him, startled. His grip on the wheel was steady, but his jaw was tight. "I don't know what you want me to say," I admitted. "The truth." His eyes flicked toward me before returning to the road. "Tell me you didn't feel it too." My throat tightened. Honesty felt dangerous, but lying felt impossible. "I did," I said quietly. "But that doesn't mean we can let it control us." He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "You always talk about control. Some things aren't meant to be controlled." The words lingered long after he fell silent again. I turned back to the window, the passing fields a blur of green and gold. My chest ached with conflicting emotions, regret, relief, longing, fear. By the time the city skyline appeared in the distance, my thoughts were no clearer. Logan would be waiting. Life would continue, outwardly unchanged. But inside, everything had shifted. I thought of the motel room, of the way Gary had looked at me, of the words neither of us could take back. One night, one broken car, one room too small to hold the truth, and now the road ahead felt unfamiliar. As the city grew closer, I realized something I couldn't deny. No matter how much I tried to bury it, that night had changed us. And whether it destroyed everything or became a secret we carried forever, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. There was no going back.